So despite the Thai T5 Edge and the MGCool Explorer 3 being based on the same internal hardware, there are quite a few differences to the two cameras. The camera that I'm reviewing today is the MGCool Explorer 3, not to be confused with any other MGCool product. Despite this not being a, quote, pro product, unquote, this is probably the best camera that MGCool makes, due to its combination of more powerful internal hardware, image stabilization, and a touch screen. Inside of the box you get very basic accessories, typical of most MGCool cameras. You get the camera itself with its black waterproof case. There are two sticky mounts, a skeleton mount to mount the camera outside of its waterproof case, a right angle adapter, USB cables, and a couple extra stickies. And that is it. If you want extra accessories, you're going to have to buy them separately for this one. The camera itself is very handsome, and I think that this is one of the best looking Chinese action cameras that I've handled to date. The waterproof case is a matte black, which gives it a very subtle finish, but at the same time it stands out compared to the clear see-through cases of other cameras. Just note that you cannot use the touchscreen while it is in the waterproof case. You have to use the two buttons to navigate. The camera itself is two-toned plastic that feels solid in the hands. One thing to note at this point is that it does use a weird battery and will not be compatible with other standard batteries that you find on Amazon for action cameras. With the camera outside of the waterproof case, you can either use the touchscreen or the two buttons on top to navigate. To me, the two buttons are backwards, with the power and menu button being on the outside, and the record and select button being on the inside. I don't know why they did that, because it would be so much easier if the record button was on the outside, just like almost any other camera in the last 20 years. The screen is bright and the touch is responsive. The menus are also broken into different submenus depending on video settings, photo settings, or overall camera settings. I would recommend setting up the camera with the touchscreen, as it can be a little bit tough to do it with just two buttons, but the good news is that all of the settings are accessible with just the two buttons, and if you hold the record button, that'll take you back to the screen before, so if you ever do find yourself stuck in a menu, just hold the record button and that'll take you back a step. At this point I noticed something a little bit odd and my first major disappointment with this camera. There are very few options for resolution. There's only 4K, 1080p 60, and 720p 120. There's no 2K 30, there's no 2K 60, there's no 1080p 30, and I find that disappointing for two reasons. The first reason being that the bitrate for 4K in these cameras isn't really high enough, and the 1080p 60, in my experience, has never been that great. So you're stuck with two resolutions that are not ideal, unlike the Thai T5 Edge, which has a excellent 2K mode. The second reason is that I don't expect any firmware updates from MGCool. More than likely you're stuck with this configuration unless somebody else hacks together some firmware which isn't guaranteed to work. And speaking of which, this is a good time to transition into the video quality of the camera. So we'll start off with 4K mode, and for the most part 4K mode is very good in daylight. The colors are accurate and vibrant, and I find the video overall very pleasing. There's a decent amount of detail, enough to call it real 4K, and the image stabilization is pretty good. I noticed that there is just a little bit of jello wobble, which is where one part of the frame seems to warp and distort when you go over bumps or shake the camera hard, but even in low light it's pretty good, and I'm seeing the same results from this camera as I saw from the Thai T5 Edge. I wouldn't use this camera primarily in low light, but if you do find yourself in a situation indoors or in non-ideal lighting, the camera does fine, albeit with a bit of noise. So this is just a brief low light test with the MGCool Explorer 3. As you can see, I'm editing the video right now and I'm not sure what happened to my other low light footage, so yeah, you can have a brief test in my bedroom here well, not really my bedroom, but the room that I'm staying in until I fly out to New Zealand, and you can get a little teaser for an upcoming review of the Lenovo 720, so yay, I guess. Video quality overall in 4K mode is very similar to the Thai T5 Edge, so if you want to see more samples for color reproduction and sharpness, I'd recommend watching the T5 Edge video. If you're deciding between these two cameras though, I'd probably go for the T5 Edge just because it has more updates and the 2.7K resolution that I find to be very usable. Where this camera improves on the Thai T5 Edge, however, is in the 1080p mode. The 1080p 60 still isn't the best that I've seen on a budget action cam. That would probably go to the Firefly 8S or the Thai T5e, but it does have a little bit more detail than what I saw from the Thai T5 Edge, and that is a good thing because I know Thai is pretty prudent about updating the firmware, so maybe they can improve on their really low resolution 1080p and bring it to more of an acceptable level like the MGCool. For the most part, if you're not a pixel peeper, you'll be happy with the 1080p, but just keep in mind that it isn't as sharp as some other cameras, and if this is the resolution you plan to use primarily, then you'll probably want to stick to the other cameras that I mentioned, the Firefly 8S or the Thai T5e. Anyways, initial impressions of this camera have been pretty positive. I will do a more thorough review on the video quality once I've used this camera a little bit more, and in the meantime, if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below and I'll be glad to answer them. Thanks for watching.